We spend a lot of time talking about the quaint and upscale beach towns that you'll find nestled here along Florida's scenic Highway 30A. We talk about its world-class restaurants and bars, its boutique shopping, its extraordinary signature events. We talk about biking, hiking, surfing, off-roading, and paddling. And of course, we talk about scenic Highway 30A's absurdly beautiful white sand beaches. But there's one thing we haven't talked about much, directly at least, and, well, it's kind of important. It's the Gulf of Mexico. After all, without her, there's really not much point of having a beach, is there? Let's start with one big, bold statement of fact. A lot of people get this wrong. The Gulf of Mexico is not the ocean. Instead, it's the world's largest gulf. While that might seem like a technicality, an ocean has no boundaries per se. But the Gulf of Mexico is corralled to the north and east by 5 states in the U.S. and by 5 Mexican states to the west and south. Meanwhile, Cuba does her best to hold the watery line way down in the southeast. The Gulf of Mexico is separated from the Atlantic Ocean by what's known as the Caribbean Sea. Covering some 618,000 square miles, the Gulf of Mexico is one of the largest and oldest bodies of water on Earth. It was formed during the late Triassic period around 300 million years ago. Prior to that, this was all dry land that extended from the Yucatan continental crust. At her widest span, the Gulf stretches east to west for 1,100 miles and north to south for about 800 miles. Her deepest point is in the Mexico Basin, also known as Sigsbee Deep. Sigsbee Deep is about 200 miles southeast of Brownsville, Texas, and drops to a mind-boggling 17,000 feet below sea level. That's almost as deep as Mount Kilimanjaro is tall. The Gulf consists of several ecological and geologic provinces, the main ones being the coastal zone, the continental shelf, the continental slope, and the dauntingly named Abysmal Plain.
The Gulf of Mexico is unique because it is an area that has a lot of biodiversity, and you have a lot of tropical fish that come in from the Caribbean Ocean, from shallow seas. Now what's unique to our area, that underwater current, which acts very similar to like we see in Nemo, where you see these currents of rivers underwater, we get a strong push, and that's why our water's so blue here.
Thanks to the Gulf Stream, the water in the Gulf of Mexico is typically about 5 degrees warmer than water found in the Atlantic. No one really bothered to study this vast body of water until the 20th century, but since then, she's become something of a natural laboratory.
Healthy Gulf is really the only nonprofit group that's dedicated to the whole U.S. Gulf of Mexico coast. So we work with people and communities from Florida all the way to Texas, any kind of environmental issues affecting our water and marine life, and engaging those communities to help solve those problems. We all have research going on in the Gulf of Mexico and trying to study more and more some of the amazing things, especially that we find offshore, like this new species of whale, the Rice's whale, that lives off of the Panhandle coast of Florida and nowhere else in the entire world.
Because of her vast oil reserves, the rock strata of its continental shelf have been studied by geophysicists and seismologists to a greater degree than perhaps that of any other oceanic basin. The first oil well was drilled in the Gulf in 1938, and since that time, thousands more have followed. Currently, there are about 30,000 wells that have been drilled, both for oil and for gas. Pollution from numerous oil spills throughout the decades have done near irreparable damage to the Gulf, while modern agricultural practices in both the U.S. and Mexico dump contaminated runoff into the Gulf, including tremendous amounts of chemical pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. As a result, toxic blooms of red algae and regions of oxygen depletion have increased in frequency, size, and duration. These occurrences have specifically been tied to large amounts of phosphates and nitrogen, particularly flowing out of the Mississippi River.
The Gulf of Mexico really is America's sea. When you think about the Mississippi River draining the entire interior of the United States, starting all the way up in Minnesota, the rain that falls in your neighborhood, that drop of water eventually comes here to the Gulf of Mexico. And that's amazing to think in that connection. The health of the Midwest, the health of our communities all the way up in those areas also affects the health of the Gulf of Mexico.
Along with tourism, commercial fishing in the Gulf is of major economic importance, supplying roughly 1/5 of the total seafood consumed in the U.S. Shrimp, flounder, red snappers, mullet, oysters, and crabs are just a few of the menu items that humans love to consume. But bull sharks reign as the Gulf's apex predator. They swim at the very top of this food chain. And by consuming large quantities of fish, they actually help regulate the population of many smaller species. But bull sharks aren't the only thing that sea critters have to worry about. In 2015, about 120 miles from the U.S. coastline, scientists discovered this otherworldly brine lake around 3,300 feet under the surface.
In the 1950s, marine biologists discovered that there were probably 5 to 10 hotspots in the entire world. And hotspot is a section of the ocean that has very low dissolved oxygen, DO, and usually has high toxicity from runoff or pollution. We have a major one. It's dubbed the hot tub of despair. And this is just going to increase and get worse if we don't take action to make things different, to put more regulations on businesses and what they can pour into the water.
The high concentration of these things, combined with heat from the thermal vents in the Earth's crust, creates a toxic environment for all life. Any hapless creature that inadvertently meanders into this dead zone will soon find itself in dire straits indeed. But fish aren't the only casualties of the Gulf's powerful temperaments. The Gulf of Mexico is also home to more than 750 known shipwrecks, ranging from modern-era ships and dating all the way back to the 16th century. Since a large part of the Gulf is right over the North American continental shelves where the water is quite shallow, it's not too hard to reach and explore many of these underwater relics. The Gulf of Mexico is big. I mean, it's the largest Gulf anywhere in the world. She's temperamental and she's powerful, capable of wiping out settlements and ships and species alike. But she's also an incredible provider. For centuries, we've plundered her depths for food and fossils, squeezing her dry of every resource possible, all for our own selfish benefit. In return, we dump our garbage at her feet and we pump toxic chemicals into her body. Meanwhile, she still provides us with food and fuel and family memories that last a lifetime. Perhaps it's time that we begin to repay a little bit of that generosity, if only by showing her the respect that she so clearly deserves.